What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes, with a little piece of bonus content. I guess you could say it's depressing bonus content, though, Grant.
Depends who you are.
Yeah. If you own any of the Sixers future draft picks, maybe you're feeling pretty good. Although they have a good amount of their future draft picks, which is what we're going to talk about here. There is some Joel Embiid news. It's not good news, but per Shams Charania, Joel Embiid is going to be reevaluated in 7 to 10 days. He will receive treatment to address swelling in his left knee. The Sixers say Embiid participated in an on-court workout Thursday and experienced an increase in knee swelling following the session. People are up in arms, Grant, because they think the Sixers are lying. And I did see, I think it was Mike O'Connor on Twitter said, and by the way, through all this, Joel Embiid last played January 4th in a win over the Nets for I think he was playing like 30 minutes, 29 minutes or whatever. They said the most charitable way to interpret this is the Sixers are not lying, and that as soon as Embiid went to work out after 10 days off, he injured his knee, which is just a disastrous sign coming off a 4-year, $190 million extension. The big question, and before you answer, we'll throw up what their kind of pick outlay looks like on the screen. Is it time for the Philadelphia 76ers to tank if they're not doing so already?
So I think the answer to that question depends on several factors. Like, when do you think they might get another shot at a highly valuable draft selection? Should that matter? And then you view that against the backdrop of which has kind of been how we've talked about the Sixers really the last several years of like, does anything matter if Joel Embiid isn't healthy? Like, does any roster building plan make sense from like a win now or win in short to medium term perspective? Like, if Embiid is this, which is to say basically not available and not, a superstar when he is, like, what are you even building towards? And like, what is your timeline? What are your priorities? It's all just kind of thrown up in the air. So that's most pertinent because that first round pick this year is going to go to the Thunder if it falls between 7 and 30. And that's the immediate concern. Like, what do you want to have happen with that if you are the Sixers? And we have to sort of discuss all those related issues to get to something that resembles an answer.
So let's look at it through this season's lens alone first. To guarantee that they keep that top 6 pick, they have to finish with a bottom 2 record. That's the only way that you can guarantee you get the 6th overall pick or better. Now, if you finish with the 3rd worst record, you have a 93% chance of keeping that pick. If you finish with the 4th worst record, you're kind of looking at like an 80% chance, a little bit more than that, of keeping it. Those odds are fine, but you have to first get to a bottom 4 record. And as we record this, for as rickety, rocky, terrible as this season has been, they are 7 losses in front of the 4th worst team in the NBA. So there's 7, like they have to make up 7 losses somewhere and then some. Is there enough time to do that? And then what is you could start ticking off, like, okay, if you finish with the 5th worst record, you have like a 60% chance of keeping the pick. I'm just kind of ballparking it here. So it's like,
how about 8th worst? Because that's what they are right now. Do you have Tankathon up? Will that tell you what that is?
So if they're the 8th worst, you have to land inside the top 4 at that point, and their chances of landing inside the top 4 would be, 18, like 25%, a little bit more than that.
Man, that's not favorable.
No, it's not. So even if you get down to the 7th worst record, we're talking about 32, 33% maybe. Does that do it for you, Grant?
That's still pretty scary. Although, so if you're just going by that math, you would say, I think is what you're driving towards. It's like a full tank, whatever that looks like. The payoff is just so uncertain that it's not really quite worth it, right? Like that's what the math would dictate your plans are. I do think you've got to weigh that against, like, well, what are you going to get out of, like, quote unquote pushing this year for as many wins as you can get? Like, what's the positive? What are your expected returns on that? And if the answer is Well, if the answer does not, if the calculus does not include Embiid gets healthy at some point and you have him for the playoffs, looking, at 85 to 90% of what his peak, I don't know. Does it matter? You might as well go for it. You might as well try to tank, try to keep that pick and luck into number one or something, because you're dead in the water if Embiid is, unavailable, not, an all NBA level player in the postseason anyway. So the math is what it is and the odds are what they are. But like, I'm still not convinced that the slim chance of getting a really high pick is a worse play than like pushing through and trying to do as well as you can this year. Is that like a flawed way to think about it in your mind?
No, I don't think so. But as you kind of mentioned, if Embiid is just kind of cooked for this season, we'll get into the long-term aspects of it. Tanking at that point looks like what? Jared McCain's already done for the year. Paul George will be in and out of the lineup anyway, even if you don't bet. So is it just shutting down Tyrese Maxey? And even is Tyrese Maxey alone gonna like? So I would view it as, if you don't think Joel Embiid's ever gonna get right this season, why not? Okay, maybe you end up sending a better pick to OKC, but what is the difference between sending, like, the pick is gone then? If you send let's say the 7th pick versus the 13th pick, like, what? Who cares?
Yeah. So you're saying tank or whatever that looks like.
We need more information on Embiid, but as you mentioned, like, their schedule coming up is not particularly favorable. So maybe you kind of use, Joel Embiid's not going to be available for that stretch anyway. So do you use the gauge of, well, let's see how they do against the Nuggets, the Cavs, and the Lakers and the Kings, and then the Nuggets again, and the Celtics and the Mavericks. And so it's just, you could just, I would say, why not just increase your odds if you think, like, because what's the point of this season if you're not, like, do you think, I'll frame it to you this way instead. Do you think that they can make the playoffs without Joel Embiid?
I mean, yeah, if you get in through the play-in, that's possible. They definitely cannot win a postseason series, which is kind of really what should be the deciding factor anyway. But like, so I guess yes, I do think they could make the playoffs. It's possible. I don't know how likely that is. So if that's the answer, that yes, they could make the playoffs, does that change anything for you? Like, I don't know that affects me. That doesn't make me want to go for it if, like, making the playoffs is the payoff,
Yeah, I guess it's just because there'd be value in just, I mean, getting to the playoffs is okay. We don't have Embiid. At least the ownership will be happy. You made gate revenue. And I guess to your point, I mean, when they have Maxey and George on the court without Joel Embiid, they're a +3 per 100 possessions with a 120 offensive rating. But it's just, then it'd be different if George was a billboard of, like, durability.
Well, I would say too, the other potential positive of, like, okay, if they make the playoffs, it probably means Paul George stays pretty healthy and plays well. So like, that's okay.
But then are you kind of burning through your good Paul George reps? Don't you want to try and preserve those?
Yeah, maybe that, but also maybe then you just feel better about next year and like, trying again and hoping Embiid, hope against hope that Embiid is healthy. But yeah, like, you might just be, Paul George might only have 100 good games left in him, and you don't want to burn 30 or 40 of them to get the 8th seed or 9th seed or whatever.
I am ultimately against tanking for them, or I don't necessarily see the point. If you could guarantee me they keep their pick, then it's a different discussion. But now let's go into if they keep their pick. So you have this top 6 draft prospect, which is a nice consolation prize for not making the playoffs in this season going off the rails. What's the move from there? How often do we see? I mean, we just saw this team do it. Jarrett McCain came in as a rookie, made an impact. But if you get the 6th overall pick, you're not working with a massive cap hold. And
right.
When you go into their salary for next season, you could still have KJ Martin on the books, Kelly Oubre Jr. on the books. You'll have Caleb Martin. So I guess you could have Andre Drummond on the books. You can step ladder your way to something. But what is the value of having that pick as a trade asset? Because what's the best player that you're going to, let's just say the numbers number 6 or number 5 pick in this draft, with what else you have available, and we have the pick outlays on the screen, and then the matching salary, there will be limitations. It'll be easier to do 3 and 4 for ones over the offseason, but like, who's the best player you're going to be able to grab for that? And oh, by the way, it has to be within the constraints of they'll be towing the second apron line if they're not going to get rid of if they're not going to get rid of KJ Martin, like we just talked about, like, okay, like they're going to probably be pretty close to the second apron.
I mean, so this is just a huge complicating factor, and one that differentiates it from, like, you're trying to think of like analogous situations. And the one that came to mind for me was, okay, so the Cavs get the number 1 pick. It's Andrew Wiggins. They trade it to Minnesota and get Kevin Love and add Kevin Love to a team that ultimately makes a bunch of finals and wins a championship. Like, that can't happen here, because if you get Cooper, if you luck out all the way and you get number 1 and you take Cooper Flag, and not saying you would trade him, but you're going to trade him for a star, a 4th player to add to Embiid, George, Maxey, like, can't really do it because of the salary constraints. Like, Flag doesn't make enough. Like, that's just, maybe you can trade the pick for something.
Yeah, the most, I'm even sorry to interrupt, but like the most that their draft, so if they won the lottery,
yeah,
and assuming that the draft, like whoever signs for the 120% of the rookie scale, which is the average, the largest cap hold would be 13.8 million as a standalone. That's the number 1 pick.
And what are you getting with that? You know, and nothing that's valuable enough to justify trading the pick. You're keeping the pick if you're keeping that player if you get it. So
right, and then doesn't it, if you want to tank, are you hoping then that this gives you the opportunity to tear it down? Doesn't that seem what this would be more about?
Maybe. Or you're like, this class is so good that the rookie we get might actually be one of our 5 closers or something. Like, I mean, I don't know what the odds of that are, not high, but like, if it's Flag, it's not going to be Flag, but if it's Flag, then maybe you're like, okay, this is now 25-26 is looking really good. Because you just add him to your 3 veterans, and I don't know, see what happens. But like, I wonder how do you think Daryl Morey looks at the calculus here? Because he's always concerned with just championship equity. And I could imagine him deciding, or him in the front, their analytics department in the front office deciding that our chances of winning a championship this year are X. Our chances of winning a championship in the next 5 years, if we tank and get a blue chip, you know, maybe the first overall pick, are Y. I could see Y just being higher than X. Like, if there's no chance they're winning a championship this year or next, then shouldn't you go for the long odds crack at the high pick? I don't know. But I bet that's how they're thinking of it.
If he decides to, what would he, let's say this is too high, but if they have a 2% chance of winning the championship this year, at their current record, they would have a 26.2% chance of landing in the top 4 and keeping their pick.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he would gravitate towards that, or is a 1% or 2%? Because the way you're framing, if they decide, well, we just don't have a chance of winning the championship this year, then it almost makes sense. Well, let's just tank, see what happens. And if it doesn't, like, we sent a good pick away, it was going to kind of happen anyway. I wasn't looking at it through that, but that kind of makes sense. So it comes down to, I mean, it does come back to Joel Embiid.
Right.
But the other question here, though, is what is now the Sixers' chances of winning a championship with this core in general? Like, does this, we've known the stuff about Joel Embiid now forever, but does this change the calculus? They signed him to the 4-year, $192 million extension, dealing with more injuries again. You can't feel good about what's happening, but does this change your impression of forget about their pick this year? And I also think it's pretty clear that they're not using any of their assets to make trades this season. I guess I wouldn't be shocked.
The only definite thing out of all of this is they're not going to make win now trades that give up future first. That would be insane.
So the most likely outcome seems like they're going to send what is a lottery pick or something close to it to OKC this year. Where do you go from there, given what's going on with Joel Embiid right now?
So if that pick goes this year, I mean, to me, that is, I mean, the one positive is you've conveyed it and the protections are lighter for next year. So that, like, it's even scarier because it's a top 4 protection in 27. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. As far as like what you do, nothing changes. You're just like, is Embiid good and healthy? Cool. We're going to contend. If he's not, we got nothing. Like that's just I don't know. I don't know. Like, are you asking like, do you try to trade him? Are you asking like, do
Well, see
you?
that's fair. We'd have to get into, okay, well, what team is gonna? I mean, some team would trade for him. The contract does not look great at the moment, and it runs through. So when his extension is over, he has a player option in 2028, 2029, his age 34 season, a $69.1 million player option. I just those out years, I mean, the present years aren't
Right.
going well. As so, shouldn't you have Maxey, you have McCain, and again, we're assuming they won't have their draft pick this year. Like, don't you kind of at that point see, all right, like what can we get for Paul George and Joel Embiid? And we like, isn't starting over or starting almost over? Doesn't it have to be on the table now?
Yes. And I do think that possibility is another reason I would be tempted to really aggressively tank and try to keep this pick and hope it lands at the very top of what everyone agrees is an awesome draft. Because if you get a top, whatever, 3, 4, 5 pick, then at least like when you, then at least you have like a way forward. Like,
Mhm.
and maybe that's in the form of this guy actually helps and Embiid is like good enough to play 50 games and whatever. But also maybe it means like we have a new cornerstone that's going to be here when we blow all the rest of this up and get a bunch more picks and we're building a team around a guy that's like 19 years old right now. Like I just think every way we look at this, and by the way, let me ask you, like, do you think that the sort of Embiid era of the Sixers as contenders is over? Like, or have you gone there yet?
Uh, yeah, I just when is he going? Like, even if he's like, what is he going to look like when he's available? Like, it's done.
Yeah.
It
So
has to be done, right?
I hate to use like a 7 to 10 days because of knee swelling thing as like the thing that's pushing me over the edge on this, but it's not just that. It's the accumulation of everything over basically his whole career. I ask because I'm kind of there too. Like I just, it's not definite, but like when does a situation like this turn around? Like he's on the back half of his career, which started with injuries and has been defined by them throughout. Like what? So this is going to magically be fixed next year when he's a year older. Like I just like what? How can you believe that? So if that's the case, and the odds are at least extremely long that Embiid can be the centerpiece on a team that does great in the regular season and goes through multiple playoff rounds, which he's never done before, by the way. So why are we assuming that's going to happen now? If that's where we are, then you tank and keep tanking. Like you're starting over. You just don't know it yet. That's like kind of the coldest way to look at it, I think. And I don't know that it's wrong.
Well, how do you think that the obligation they owe after OKC to Brooklyn in 2027 impacts this at all? So it's top
So
8 protected through 2028, and then it turns into a second. You have to be pretty bad to guarantee, still be pretty bad. I mean, to guarantee that you're going to keep I mean, like if it was this year, they'd be on pace to keep it.
right. I mean, should we look at this as you're gonna give up one of these to the Thunder? So just one of these as a first. So just make sure it's only one, like instead of two, because you really hate to give up two.
If you are going to burn it down, though, that would also consist of trading Paul George. Would the time to do that be this season, or is it over the off season?
I mean, if you got it, it's probably not this season because everybody's terrified of big contracts. If you're not in the Jimmy Butler business for that money and what he'd want on an extension, are you in the Paul George business? Because how different is that really going forward?
Right.
Um, Minus the headaches and stuff. But like, I guess I would just by default say this trade deadline doesn't seem to be the time to trade anybody. Like, I think maybe you wait until the summer, but you have to be thinking about it. You might even think about Maxi. I don't know. Like, maybe you put Maxi out there. Who knows?
Well, I guess I was thinking about, do you see if anyone would take him this season without sending back the most damaging money? But because, okay, let's say Bradley Beal would waive his no trade clause to go to Philly. Is Phoenix doing the same trade they're doing for Butler for Paul George? And if you're the Sixers, do you consider that because Bradley Beal, okay, you're saddled with a no trade clause then, but his deal it amounts to 1 year shorter than
Yeah.
Paul George's?
I don't love that for I don't. I
Anybody?
mean, I like it for Phoenix. I like it better for Phoenix, I guess, because I think Paul George still is just a better player than Beal, and they don't seem to care about how long that money's going to go out, and they don't have their picks anyway, so they might as well try to be better. I don't like it at all for the Sixers, just because Beal. Yeah, man, that's just
Well,
there are no good trades. There are no good trades, Dan. We don't have any.
The idea was basically you would only do it to get that 2030. So now you're just like, you've got this bigger stash and you're going to go through the next 2 years or 3 years of this rebuild. But also the sooner you move Paul George, unless you're going to shut him down at some point, which maybe you do, if you are going to just say, well, let's just tank and see if we keep our pick or not, moving Paul George would presumably help that effort.
Presumably. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could just not play him basically. It wouldn't be that hard to sell that he's injured. Or just,
and what you're not doing is you're not attaching picks to any of these guys to get them off.
No, I mean, you can if you're doing what we think they should do. You've got to keep all your own picks are precious now. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a rough development, but I keep coming back to like how different are things really for the Sixers than they've ever been. It's just they go as Embiid goes, and if he's done as the level of player he was, then you gotta then so is the team. Like, so if he's done, you are. So you got to just pivot, I guess, whatever that looks like, whenever that has to happen.
Finally, though, what would you actually expect them to do?
I would expect them to at least consider the wisdom of tanking and probably conclude that like we can't get bad enough to really make this pay off in a sure way, and kind of just go through this season as what they are. I would hope they wouldn't do that, but that feels like the most likely outcome to me. Like, not going to trade anybody, just see how we do.
You might have sold me on tanking. Like, decide, okay, Joel Embiid's done for the year. This is lost money. Because I don't think going the nuclear route, if they do, I agree it would happen over the offseason. I don't expect that, though. I think they would have to win the draft lottery. And even then, if you could, like, I mean, but that's the problem, too, is, okay, you have Cooper Flagg. If you want to stay under the second apron so that you can combine contracts, I guess over the offseason, you can combine those contracts and then just finish under the second apron. But at the same time, if you're trading for a really good player, the odds of you getting cheaper in the process are very slim. It's so confusing. But my point being, you've almost talked me to the idea of, as of right now, you have a 26.2% chance of landing in the top 4 if you finish here. And do you think they can out tank anybody that's below them? You have Brooklyn, Portland, Utah, Toronto, Charlotte, New Orleans, and Washington.
Not necessarily at all. Like, all those, those teams are as incentivized or more so, and just as bad or worse. So how do you they have to be so much worse than so many of those teams to guarantee that pick. I still think if it's me, I'm trying. And worst case scenario, like you said, you give up the number 8 pick or the number 7 pick or whatever, but at least that's off. At least that's done. That's the upside. I think if I'm the Sixers, I think what the Sixers are thinking, maybe if they're not doing the Daryl Morey math that I suggested of like championship equity, is they're saying, well, this summer Embiid's not going to be in the Olympics. We get a full off season of rehab.
Yeah.
We never got to see these 3 guys for an extended stretch. Let's go into next year. We'll make some kind of trade with our picks in the off season and try to add more talent, and let's take a shot at it. I don't think the payoff is very likely if they go that route.
My whole thing, though, is they're not going to. So as of right now, they're at the 8th worst record. The only team that's in danger of being worse than them moving forward, I think, when you look at the other team, are the Bulls. And so I would say, because like the Warriors, the Spurs, the Suns, the Kings, the Pistons, the Heat, like those don't seem like team. First of all, the Sixers have a bunch of losses on most of those teams already. So I think you could also just look at it this way as if you stay the course, at worst, you're going to have a 21% chance of keeping your pick. How much different if you tank and you end up with a 26% chance, or maybe you're able to out tank the Nets or the Blazers or something. So they could just stay the course and the odds might not change. That's probably what ends up happening. But you sold me on the idea of, if you just sit here and say you have a 0% chance of winning the title this season, going after a 26% chance of keeping this pick, and then you just figure out what to do. if the nightmare scenario is like you end up with a top 4 prospect and you have to figure out whether to rebuild or turn them into a player that helps you, that's a pretty fucking great problem to
Right.
have.
It's you trade your situation right now for that in a heartbeat. You have all the same problems except you have Cooper Flag or whatever, or Ace Bailey or whatever. Like that's a better place to be.
Do you have any predictions before we get out of here of where do you think are the Sixers gonna? The Joel Embiid of it all is just, you're right. A 10-day update should not be having us all in a tizzy, but you're right. It's the accumulation of everything that's happened. And I just don't, because you could also say if Joel Embiid's healthy and you're just in the play-in, imagine being the 1 or 2 seed in the East and your reward is playing a Sixers team that has Joel Embiid available.
And I think my prediction ultimately will be that the Sixers will hold out hope that that's a possibility and recognize that it's really, really going to be hard for them to improve their lottery odds from here and just kind of grit their teeth, go for it, and whatever that means. Maybe Embiid gets back and he looks better than he has at any point this year. It's not what I would do, but I think that's probably the way things go here.
And even the middle ground would just be saying, until Joel Embiid can't play again this year, you kind of just stay the course. And if it gets to a point where it's, oh, we're in the play-in, but he's not available, then just throw the play-in games and like just make sure that your lottery odds are as high as possible that way. Or so, I don't know, but that's probably the middle ground. But I came into this saying there's just no reason for them to tank, and you sold me on the idea of I don't think they're going to even come close to winning the championship this year. And so why not just try and juice the odds of keeping your pick to 21 to 26%?
It's a Maury way to look at it. I don't know if that's right, but I do think that's going to be a consideration at least.
We're going to eat some crow on the offseason grades that we gave them, though, when we regrade those later. I'll tell you that much.
I regret nothing. I stand on it. Those were good moves.
Unless you have anything else, are you ready to take us out of here?
No, thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Remember, rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube as well. Leave us some comments there. Let us know what you think the Sixers should do and what they will do, and whether those are the same things or different things, as we've kind of equivocated plenty here in 25 minutes. Thanks again, everybody. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.